The dusty road stretched endlessly under the blazing Texas sun. Maria wiped sweat from her forehead as she walked toward the small town ahead. Her worn shoes hurt her feet, and her dress was dirty from 3 days of walking. She clutched a crumpled letter in her hand, the only thing connecting her to hope. Cedar Ridge looked like every other cattle town she had passed. Wooden buildings lined the main street, and horses were tied to posts outside the saloon. Cowboys in worn hats walked slowly in the heat. Maria felt their curious stares as she passed. A Mexican woman traveling alone was not common here. She stopped in front of what should have been her aunt's boarding house. The letter had promised her a place to stay, work to do, and safety from the life she had left behind. But the building looked different. New paint, different signs. Her heart sank. "Can I help you, miss?" An older woman appeared in the doorway. Her voice was kind but cautious. "I am looking for Rosa Santos. She owns this boarding house," Maria said in careful English. Her accent was thick, but she tried her best. The woman's face softened with sympathy. "Oh, honey, Rosa passed away 6 months ago. We bought this place from her nephew. I'm sorry." Maria felt the world spin around her. Rosa was dead. The boarding house was gone. She had nowhere to go and no money left. Behind her, she could hear men talking and laughing, but their voices seemed far away. "Are you all right, dear?" The woman asked. Maria forced herself to stand straight. She had survived worse than this. "Yes, thank you. Do you know? Is there work in town? I can cook and clean." "Well, there's always the saloon, but that's no place for a decent girl. Most folks here have their own help." The woman paused, thinking. Jake Morrison has been looking for someone. He's the big rancher outside town. Lost his wife last year. Poor man. He's been asking around for a woman to help run his house." Maria's pulse quickened. A job meant survival. "Where can I find this man?" "His ranch is about 3 miles north of town. Big spread, you can't miss it. But honey, he's not exactly, he's been real hard since his wife died. Doesn't talk much to anyone." As the sun began to set, Maria walked toward the Morrison ranch. Her feet were bleeding now, but she kept going. Orange and pink light painted the sky, and she could see cattle in the distance. The ranch was bigger than anything she had seen. Wooden fences stretched in every direction, and a large house sat on a small hill. Cowboys were riding in from the fields as she approached. They stared at her with surprise. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, tipped his hat. "Evening, miss. You looking for someone?" "I need to speak with Mr. Morrison," she said. The cowboy's expression changed. He doesn't much like visitors these days. What's this about?" Before Maria could answer, a deep voice called out from the house. "What's going on out there?" A tall man stepped onto the porch. Even in the fading light, Maria could see he was strong and weathered by years of hard work. His hair was dark with gray at the edges, and his face looked like it hadn't smiled in months. This had to be Jake Morrison. He walked down toward them, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. When he got close enough to see Maria clearly, he stopped. "Who are you?" His voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't friendly either. Maria took a deep breath. This was her only chance. Everything she had left depended on the next few minutes. "My name is Maria Santos. I heard you might need help with your house." She paused, then added quietly, "I have nowhere else to go." Jake studied her face in the dim light. She was young, maybe 23 or 24. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her brown eyes showed both fear and determination. Her dress was simple but clean despite her long journey. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "Mexico, my family. I had to leave. My aunt was supposed to help me, but she is dead now." Maria's voice stayed steady, but Jake could hear the worry underneath. "And you think you can run a ranch house? This isn't some little kitchen in town. We've got 20 men who need feeding, clothes that need washing, and work that starts before the sun comes up." "I can do it," Maria said firmly. "I've been working since I was small. I can cook for many people. I can clean and mend clothes. I'm not afraid of hard work." Jake was quiet for a long moment. The cowboys behind him waited to see what he would say. Maria held her breath. "I don't know anything about you," he said finally. For all I know, you could be running from trouble that might follow you here. I am running from trouble, Maria admitted, but not the kind that hurts other people. I just want to work and be safe. Something in her honesty made Jake pause. He had been planning to hire someone through letters, someone safe and predictable from back east. This young woman was neither of those things. But there was something about the way she stood there, tired and scared but still proud, that reminded him of something he had lost. The work is hard, he said. The pay is fair, but not much. You'd have a room in the house and meals. If you can't keep up, you're gone. Maria felt relief wash over her like cool water. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You will not be sorry. Will. See about that, Jake said, turning back toward the house. Come on then, Lucy will show you around. As they walked toward the house, Maria whispered a prayer of thanks. She had found shelter, at least for now. But as she looked at Jake Morrison's broad shoulders ahead of her, she wondered what kind of man she would be working for. His wife had died, the woman in town said. What had that done to him? The house was bigger than any place Maria had ever lived. Jake led her to a small room near the kitchen. This is your room, he said, his voice catching slightly. Supper is at 6, breakfast at 5. The men work hard, so they eat a lot. After he left, Maria sat on the narrow bed and finally let herself cry. She was safe for now, but she was also alone in a strange place with a man who seemed to carry his own deep sadness. Tomorrow, her real test would begin. Outside her window, she could hear cattle lowing in the distance and men talking quietly as they finished their day. This was her new world now. She would have to make it work because there was nowhere else to go. The rooster crowed at 4:30 in the morning, but Maria was already awake. She had barely slept, thinking about everything that had happened. Through her small window, she could see the first hints of light on the horizon. Time to prove herself. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen. It was bigger than her whole house back in Mexico, with a large stove, wooden counters, and shelves lined with pots and dishes. Someone had left supplies out for her: flour, eggs, bacon, coffee. At least 20 men would need feeding in 30 minutes. Maria rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She knew how to cook for large groups from helping in her family's restaurant. Soon the smell of coffee and bacon filled the kitchen, and she had biscuits rising in the oven. Jake appeared in the doorway just as she was flipping the last batch of eggs. He looked surprised to see everything ready. You're up early, he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot she had made. Work starts early on a ranch, Maria replied, not looking up from the stove. I learned that yesterday. Jake studied her as she moved efficiently around the kitchen. Her dark hair was braided back, and she wore a simple blue dress with an apron. She worked with confidence, like someone who had been cooking her whole life. The men will be in soon, he said. There. They might not be used to someone like you. Maria finally looked at him. Someone like me? Mexican, woman, young. Jake's voice was matter-of-fact, not mean. Some of them fought in the war. Others have their own ideas about things. I understand, Maria said quietly. I will earn their respect through my work. The kitchen door swung open and cowboys began filing in. They were dusty and tired, clearly hungry after their early morning chores. When they saw Maria behind the stove, some stopped talking. Boys, this is Maria, Jake said simply. She's going to be helping around the house. An older cowboy with gray whiskers nodded politely. Ma'am? The others followed his lead, but Maria could feel their curious stares. She served them eggs, bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee. The men ate quietly at first, but soon she heard murmurs of approval. One young cowboy asked for seconds, then thirds. By the time they left for the day's work, the mood had warmed considerably. That was mighty fine cooking, miss, the gray whiskered cowboy said, tipping his hat. Best breakfast we've had in months. After the men left, Jake lingered in the kitchen. They liked your food, he observed. Food is easy, Maria said as she began cleaning dishes. People are harder. Why did you really come here? Jake asked suddenly. A young woman like you. There must have been other choices. Maria's hands stilled in the soapy water. She had known this question would come. My father owed money to a man in our town, a bad man. The only way to pay the debt was for me to marry his son. So you ran away. I tried to stay. I tried to find another way. But this man, he was not going to wait much longer. So yes, I ran away. Jake was quiet for a moment. And you ended up here. I ended up here. Maria turned to face him. Mr. Morrison, I know you do not know me. I know this is strange. But I need to ask you something important. Something in her tone made Jake pay closer attention. What is it? The woman in town said you were looking for a wife. Not just someone to cook and clean, but a real wife. Maria's voice was steady, but Jake could see her hands shaking slightly. I know we are. Strangers, I know this sounds crazy, but please choose me. Jake stared at her in shock. This was not what he had expected. I can cook, Maria continued quickly. You saw that this morning. I can clean and take care of a house. I can work as hard as any man, and she took a deep breath. I can give. You sons, strong sons to help with your ranch? You don't know what you're asking, Jake said, his voice rough. Marriage isn't just about cooking and cleaning, it's complicated. I know it is not love, Maria said quietly. But it could be partnership. You need someone to help you. I need somewhere to be safe. We could help each other. Jake turned away from her, staring out the window at his land. My first wife, Anna? She died having my baby. Both of them died. His voice was barely above a whisper. I swore I'd never put another woman through that. Life is dangerous everywhere, Maria said gently. Women die in childbirth in Mexico too. But they also live. They have children and raise families and find happiness. You cannot stop living because you are afraid. It's not that simple. Maybe it is. Maria moved closer to him. Mr. Morrison, Jake, I see how sad you are. I know what it feels like. To lose everything. But hiding from life will not bring your wife back? Jake looked at her then, really looked at her. She was young and pretty, yes, but there was something else. Strength, determination, the kind of woman who could survive anything and keep going. I was expecting someone different, he said finally. Someone from back east, quiet and proper, and predictable. Predictable is boring, Maria said with a small smile. Besides, those proper ladies from back east, do you think they could handle this place? Could they cook for 20 hungry cowboys? Could they survive out here? Despite himself, Jake almost smiled. Probably not, so give me a chance, give us both a chance. 1 week, if after 1 week you decide I cannot do this job, I will leave. But if I can prove myself, if I can show you that I can be the partner you need, then we talk about marriage. Jake was quiet for a long time. It was crazy. He barely knew this woman. She could be lying about everything. She could bring trouble to his ranch. But something about her reminded him of what it felt like to hope. 1 week, he said finally, but I'm not promising anything. 1 week is all I need, Maria said. As Jake left the kitchen, Maria began planning. She had 7 days to prove she could be more than just a cook and housekeeper. She had 7 days to show him that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. She looked around the kitchen that was now hers to command. It was a start. But she would need to be clever, strong, and very careful. Jake Morrison was a good man, she could see that. But he was also a hurt man. Winning his trust would be the hardest thing she had ever done. Outside, she could hear the sound of cattle and horses. This was going to be her world now, if she was smart enough and strong enough to claim it. By the 3rd day, Maria had established a routine that impressed even the most doubting cowboys. She woke before dawn, had coffee ready when the men stumbled into the kitchen, and sent them out with full bellies and packed lunches. But she didn't stop there. After breakfast, she would clean the house from top to bottom, then venture outside to tackle jobs that the previous housekeeper had never touched. She mended torn shirts and pants that the cowboys had given up on. She organized the cluttered supply room. She even convinced Jake to let her plant a small vegetable garden behind the house. Fresh vegetables will save money, she explained as she worked the soil with determination. And the men will be healthier. Tommy, the youngest cowboy, watched her from the fence. He was barely 18, with sandy hair and a shy smile. "Ma'am, you sure you know what you're doing?" "This soil is pretty tough." "Everything worthwhile is tough," Maria replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "In Mexico, my grandmother grew the most beautiful garden in rocky ground. She said plants are like people. They get stronger when they have to work for what they need." Tommy grinned. "My ma used to say something like that." As the days passed, more of the cowboys began stopping by to talk with Maria. She learned their names and listened to their stories. Some were young men seeking adventure. Others were older, with families back east they were trying to support. All of them were far from home, and Maria's warm smile and kind words reminded them of what they were missing. "Miss Maria," called out Pedro, one of the few other Mexican workers on the ranch, "could you look at this tear in my jacket?" "The cold mornings are getting worse." "Of course," Maria said, taking the worn leather jacket. As she examined it, she noticed how thin it was. "Pedro, this jacket will not keep you warm much longer, but I have an idea." That evening she approached Jake as he went over the ranch books in his study. The room was simple but comfortable, with leather chairs and a large wooden desk. Maria knocked softly on the open door. "Come in," Jake said without looking up. "I wanted to talk to you about the men's winter clothes," Maria said. "Some of them are not prepared for the cold weather coming." Jake finally looked at her. It had been 3 days since their agreement, and he had to admit she was exceeding his expectations. The house ran more smoothly than it had in months. The food was excellent, and the men seemed happier. "Winter gear costs money," he said. "These men know they have to provide their own clothes." "Yes, but good workers are worth the investment." Maria said carefully, "A sick cowboy cannot work. A cowboy who leaves for a warmer place cannot work either. If you buy the materials, I can sew warm jackets for the men who need them. It will cost less than buying ready-made clothes, and the men will know you care about them." Jake studied her face. "You know how to make winter coats?" "My mother was a seamstress. I learned from her," Maria smiled. "And loyal workers are the best investment a rancher can make." "You've been thinking about this." "I think about many things." "That could help this ranch," Maria admitted. "I want to be useful." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Order what you need from town." The next morning, Maria was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the corral. She looked up to see a large black horse bucking violently while Tommy tried to stay in the saddle. The horse was angry and afraid, and Tommy was in real danger. Without thinking, Maria dropped the wet sheets and ran toward the fence. Most of the other cowboys were out on the range, and the few men nearby seemed unsure how to help without making things worse. "Easy, boy," Maria called softly to the horse, climbing through the fence rails. "Easy now." "Miss Maria, get back!" Tommy shouted, but he could barely hold on. The horse spun and bucked again, and Tommy flew off, landing hard in the dirt. The horse reared up, hooves flashing dangerously close to the fallen cowboy. Maria stepped forward slowly, speaking in soft Spanish. "Tranquilo, mi amigo, tranquilo." Her voice was calm and musical, and something about it seemed to reach the angry animal. The horse's ears flicked forward. He was still agitated, but he was listening. "That's right," Maria continued, taking another small step closer. "You are scared, yes? New place, new people. I understand." Gradually, the horse's breathing slowed. Maria was close enough now to extend her hand, palm up. The horse sniffed cautiously, then allowed her to touch his neck. "There. You go," she whispered. "You are brave and strong, but you do not need to fight everyone." "I'll be damned," said Charlie, the gray-whiskered cowboy who had arrived just in time to see the end of the drama. "That horse has been nothing but trouble since we brought him in." Maria continued stroking the horse's neck. "He is not trouble. He is just afraid. Someone was mean to him before, yes? Look at these scars." She pointed to faint marks on the horse's flanks, signs of rough treatment. Tommy picked himself up from the dirt, dusting off his clothes. "How did you know how to Do that, Miss Maria? My grandfather had horses, Maria said simply. He taught me that fear makes animals dangerous, but kindness makes them loyal. That evening, word of Maria's way with the difficult horse had spread throughout the ranch. Jake found her in the kitchen preparing dinner, and she could tell he had heard the story. Charlie says you tamed Devil's Wind, he said. Maria looked up from the pot she was stirring. I just helped him remember that not all people are cruel. That horse has thrown 3 men this week. Maybe those men were trying to break him instead of understand him. Maria suggested quietly. Jake realized she might be talking about more than just horses. And you think understanding works better than breaking? I think most creatures just want to feel safe, Maria said. When they feel safe, they can be their best selves. As Jake watched her work in his kitchen, humming softly to herself, he found himself thinking dangerous thoughts. She had been here less than a week, but already the ranch felt different. More alive. The men were happier, the house was cleaner, and even that troubled horse seemed calmer, but she was asking him to risk his heart again. And that was something he wasn't sure he could do. Outside the kitchen window, he could see some of the men talking and laughing as they finished their chores. For the first time in over a year, his ranch felt like a home instead of just a place to work. Maybe that was worth the risk. By the end of her first week, Maria had transformed the Morrison Ranch. The house sparkled, the men's clothes were mended, and the atmosphere had changed from one of quiet sadness to something warmer. But Maria noticed that Jake still kept his distance from her, watching from afar, but never getting too close. On Saturday evening, as she prepared a special dinner to mark her first week, Maria found herself humming an old Mexican lullaby her mother used to sing. She didn't notice Jake standing in the doorway until he spoke. That's a pretty song, he said quietly. Maria turned, surprised. Oh, I did not hear you come in. Dinner will be ready soon. What does it mean, the song? Maria paused, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. It is about finding home in unexpected places. My mother sang it to me when I was small and afraid of new things. Are you afraid now? Jake asked, stepping closer. Sometimes, Maria admitted. This is all very new for me. But I think I'm beginning to understand what home feels like. Something in her words made Jake's chest tighten. He had been fighting his growing attraction to this remarkable woman all week. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was strong, kind, and had a way of bringing light into dark places. Maria, he began, then stopped. What was he doing? He had sworn never to risk his heart again. Before either of them could say more, the sound of horses approaching fast interrupted the moment. Jake immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Stay inside, he told. Maria, moving toward the window, through the glass, they could see a group of well-dressed riders approaching the house. At their head was a tall man in expensive clothes riding a beautiful white horse. Maria felt a chill of recognition, though she had never seen this man before. Thomas Blackwood, Jake muttered, and Maria could hear dislike in his voice. Who is? He, she asked, owns the biggest ranch in the county. Also thinks he owns everything else. Jake's jaw was tight. Wonder what he wants? They found out soon enough. Thomas Blackwood dismounted with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. He was handsome in a cold way, with pale eyes and perfectly groomed dark hair. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. Morrison, he called out cheerfully. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Jake stepped onto the porch, and Maria could see the tension in his shoulders. Blackwood, what brings you out here? Just being neighborly, Thomas said, but his eyes had already found Maria through the window. I heard you had some changes around here. Nothing that concerns you. Thomas's smile widened. Oh, but I think it does. You see, I've been hearing interesting stories about a certain young lady who's been causing quite a stir. Taming wild horses, cooking like an angel, turning your rough cowboys into gentlemen. His gaze fixed on Maria. I simply had to come see this wonder for myself. Jake stepped forward, blocking Thomas's view of the window. Maria works for me. That's all you need to know. Now, no need to be possessive. Thomas laughed. I'm just admiring your good fortune. He raised his voice. Slightly. Miss, wouldn't you like to come out and meet a neighbor? Maria felt Jake's warning look, but something in Thomas's tone made her uneasy. She stepped onto the porch anyway, staying close to Jake. Mr. Blackwood, she said with a polite nod. Thomas's eyes lit up as he took in her appearance. My word. Morrison, you certainly know how to pick them, Miss. Forgive me, I don't believe I caught your full name. Maria Santos, she replied carefully. Santos? Spanish? When Maria nodded, Thomas's smile became calculating. How fascinating. And tell me, Miss Santos, are you finding ranch life agreeable? I like it very much, Maria said firmly. Of course, you do, but surely a woman of your obvious talents might appreciate greater opportunities. Thomas gestured toward his expensive horse and well-dressed men. I own the largest ranch in 3 counties. A woman in my house would want for nothing. Maria felt Jake tense beside her. Thank you for the kind words, Mr. Blackwood, but I am very happy here. Are you? Thomas's voice took on a slightly mocking tone. Living in a hired woman's room, cooking for a bunch of rough cowboys? My dear, you could be the lady of a grand house with servants of your own? I said I am happy here, Maria repeated. Her voice cooler now, Thomas studied her for a moment, then turned back to Jake. Morrison? Surely we can discuss this reasonably. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for Miss Santos's contract. She's not for sale, Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet. Everything is for sale at the right price, Thomas replied smoothly. Besides, what can you really offer her? This little ranch, a few hundred head of cattle. I can give her a mansion? The finest clothes, a position in society. And what would you want in return? Maria asked sharply. Thomas's smile became predatory. Why, marriage, of course. I've been looking for a wife, and you seem ... suitable. The word made Maria's skin crawl. I am not looking for a husband, Mr. Blackwood. Not looking? But my dear girl, what else is there for a woman like you? You can't seriously plan to spend your life as a servant. That's enough, Jake said, stepping forward. You heard her answer. Now get off my land. Thomas's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and dangerous underneath. This isn't over, Morrison. Miss Santos, when you tire of playing house here, you know where to find me? As Thomas and his men rode away, Maria felt shaken. There had been something in his eyes, a look of ownership that reminded her too much of the man she had fled in Mexico. Are you all right? Jake asked, noticing her pale face. He reminded me of someone, Maria said quietly. Someone I hope never to see again. Blackwood's trouble, Jake said. He's used to getting what he wants, and he doesn't like being told no. The night, Maria lay in bed thinking about the encounter. Thomas Blackwood's offer had been tempting in some ways, security, wealth, status. But something about him had felt wrong, dangerous even. More troubling was the way Jake had defended her. For a moment, when he said she wasn't for sale, she had heard something in his voice that gave her hope. But afterward he had returned to his distant politeness. Meanwhile, Jake paced in his study, unable to sleep. Seeing Thomas look at Maria that way had awakened something protective and possessive in him that he thought he had buried with his wife. The thought of Maria in Blackwood's hands made his stomach turn. But what could he offer her? Blackwood was right about one thing. He could give Maria things that Jake never could. Wealth, social position, an easy life. As he stood at his window looking out at the moonlit ranch, Jake realized he was in love with Maria Santos. Somewhere between her first desperate plea and her gentle way with his broken horse, she had found her way into his heart. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Outside, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows. Thomas Blackwood had not gone far, and he was not a man who accepted defeat easily. If he couldn't buy Maria Santos, he would find another way to have her. After all, there were many ways to remove obstacles, and Jake Morrison was looking more and more like an obstacle that needed removing. 3 weeks had passed since Maria's arrival, and life on the Morrison ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The men respected her, the work flowed smoothly. and Jake found himself looking forward to their brief conversations each day. But Maria carried a growing secret that was becoming harder to hide. She first noticed the signs. 2 weeks after her arrival, the morning sickness that sent her rushing from the kitchen, the exhaustion that hit her in the afternoons. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just stress from her new life. But as the symptoms continued, the truth became undeniable. She was carrying Jake's child. Their relationship had grown closer over the weeks. What started as polite conversation had become something deeper. Jake had begun joining her for coffee after dinner, sharing stories about his ranch and listening to her tales of Mexico. One evening, when she had been crying over a letter she was writing to her sister, Jake had comforted her. One thing led to another, and they had found solace in each other's arms. Now, as Maria stood in the kitchen trying to keep down her breakfast, she wondered how to tell Jake. Would he think she had planned this? Would he feel trapped into marrying her? Her worries were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. But these weren't the familiar sounds of the ranch hands returning. These horses were ridden hard by men in a hurry. Maria looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. 3 men in travel-worn clothes sat on tired horses, and she recognized the cold face of their leader, Carlos Vega, her father's creditor, and the man she had fled Mexico to avoid. Behind them, looking pleased with himself, rode Thomas Blackwood. Jake emerged from the barn, instantly alert to trouble. "What's your business here?" he called out. Carlos dismounted, his hand resting on his gun. "We are looking for a woman, Maria Santos. We have information that she is here." "Never heard of her," Jake said evenly, but Maria could see his hand moving toward his own weapon. "Come now, Morrison," Thomas interjected smoothly. "These gentlemen have traveled a very long way. Surely we can be helpful." He gestured toward the house. "Miss Santos, why don't you come out? Your father is very worried about you." Maria's heart pounded as she realized she had been betrayed. Thomas must have contacted her family somehow, or perhaps hired men to track her down. Either way, her past had caught up with her. She stepped onto the porch, her chin raised despite her fear. "My father sent you?" Carlos smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "Your father is very concerned about his debt, Niña. Don Rodrigo grows impatient waiting for his new bride." "I will not marry that pig," Maria said firmly. "You will do as your family requires," Carlos replied. "Honor demands it. Besides, Don Rodrigo has been very generous. He has agreed to forgive your father's debts in exchange for you." Jake stepped closer to the porch. "The lady said no." "I suggest you respect that." Carlos laughed harshly. "And who are you to interfere? Some gringo cowboy who thinks he can steal another man's property?" "I'm not property," Maria said, anger flashing in her eyes. "You are whatever your father says you are," Carlos shot back. "Now gather your things. We leave today." "She's not going anywhere," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. Thomas cleared his throat. "Actually, Morrison, I think you'll find this situation is more complicated than you realize. You see, Miss Santos is technically a fugitive. She fled Mexico without her family's permission, which makes her, well, let's say legally speaking, these gentlemen have a claim to her." "This is America," Jake said. "Mexican law doesn't apply here." "Perhaps not," Thomas agreed. "But I'm sure the local sheriff would be very interested to hear about someone harboring a fugitive. Bad for business, you know. People might start thinking your ranch isn't a safe place to work." Maria saw the trap closing around them. Thomas had planned this carefully, using her own family against her. If she stayed, she would bring trouble to Jake and his ranch. If she left... "I need to speak with Maria alone," Jake said. 5 minutes, Carlos agreed. "Then we go." Jake led Maria into the house, closing the door firmly behind them. Once they were alone, he turned to her with anguished eyes. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" he asked. "I did not want to bring my troubles to your door," Maria said, tears starting to fall. I hoped they would not find me." "We can fight them," Jake said. "My men are loyal." "We can send them away." "And then what?" Maria asked. "They will come back with more men. They will bring the law." They will destroy everything you have built here. She took a shaky breath. There is something else I need to tell you. Jake saw something in her eyes that made him go still. What is it? I am carrying your child, Maria whispered. Jake felt the world shift around him. A baby, his baby. After losing Anna and their child, he had never thought he would have another chance. But now, are you sure? He asked. Maria nodded. I am sure. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Then we'll figure this out, all of it. I won't. Let them take you. You do not understand, Maria said, pulling back to look at him. If I go with them, you will be safe. The ranch will be safe. But if you stay, we face this together, Jake said firmly. You're not alone anymore, Maria, and I'm not letting anyone take my wife and child. Wife! Maria's eyes widened. If you'll have me, Jake said. I know this isn't the proposal you dreamed of, but Yes, Maria said quickly. Yes, of course. Yes, a loud knock on the door interrupted them. Time's up. Carlos called. Jake kissed Maria quickly, then squared his shoulders. Stay behind me, he told her. They walked out onto the porch together. Jake's cowboys had started gathering, sensing trouble. Charlie and Tommy flanked the steps, their hands near their guns. She's staying, Jake announced. Maria is my wife. Carlos's face darkened. Wife? You think a gringo marriage will protect her from her obligations? I think you need to get off my land, Jake replied. Thomas urged his horse forward. Morrison, you're making a mistake. These men won't give up easily, and there are legal ways to handle this situation. The only mistake I'm making is not running you off sooner, Jake said. Carlos's hand moved to his gun. You cannot keep what? Is not yours, cowboy? Try and take her, Jake said, his own hand ready. The tension stretched like a tight wire, everyone waiting to see who would move first. Maria stepped forward, despite Jake's protective stance. Wait, she said. There is another way. All eyes turned to her. What if I could pay my father's debt instead? What if there was enough money to satisfy Don Rodrigo without a marriage? Carlos laughed. Where would a servant girl get that kind of money? Maria looked at Thomas Blackwood, an idea forming. Mr. Blackwood, you said you wanted to make a generous offer. What if instead of trying to buy me, you paid my family's debt? I am sure a man of your wealth could spare such a small amount. Thomas's eyes glittered with interest. And what would I get in return? My grateful thanks, Maria said carefully. And the knowledge that you helped a family in need. Not enough, Thomas said, but perhaps we could negotiate something else. A partnership of sorts. You work for me for 1 year, and I'll pay your family's debt? No deal, Jake said immediately, but Maria was thinking fast. What kind of work? She asked. Thomas smiled. Oh, cooking, cleaning, the usual household duties. I'm sure we could find an arrangement that would satisfy everyone. Maria could hear the implications in his voice, and so could Jake, but she also saw something else, a way to protect both Jake and her unborn child. I need time to think, she said finally. Carlos spat on the ground. You have until tomorrow. Morning, Nina. Then we take you with us, with or without the gringo's permission? As the men rode away, Maria felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Protect Jake and the ranch by sacrificing herself to Thomas Blackwood, or stay and fight, risking everything Jake had worked for. But as she felt Jake's strong arm around her and thought of the child growing inside her, Maria realized she was done running. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about the impossible choice before her. Outside her window, she could hear Jake pacing on the porch, keeping watch. He had stationed men around the house, but they all knew Carlos, and his men were out there somewhere, waiting for morning. Around midnight, Maria made a decision. She dressed quietly and slipped out of her room. Jake was sitting on the porch steps, his rifle across his knees, staring out into the darkness. You should be sleeping, he said without turning around. So should you, Maria replied, sitting down. Beside him, they sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Finally, Jake spoke. I've been thinking about what you said. About paying the debt. Jake, I cannot ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. Jake turned to look at her. I have some money saved. Not enough for Blackwood's grand gestures, but maybe enough to satisfy this Carlos fellow. Maria shook her head. That money is for your ranch, for your future. I will not let you throw it away on my family's problems. Our family's problems, Jake corrected gently. You're my wife now, remember? And that baby you're carrying is my child. That makes your problems mine. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. In Mexico, they say a man shows his love through his actions, not his words. But Jake, this action could ruin you. And losing you would ruin me too, Jake said simply. Before Maria could respond, they heard the sound of a horse approaching slowly. Both of them tensed, Jake raising his rifle. But the rider called out softly, "Don't shoot." "It's Tommy." The young cowboy emerged from the darkness, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss, I've got news. Bad news." Jake stood up quickly. "What is it?" "I rode into town to see what I could learn about those Mexican fellows," Tommy said, dismounting. "Turns out Blackwood's been busy. He's hired himself a bunch of gunmen. They're camped just outside town, waiting for morning." "How many?" Jake asked grimly. 8, maybe 10. All of them look like they know their business. Tommy glanced at Maria. "Sorry, ma'am, but it gets worse. Blackwood's been telling folks in town that you're a criminal. Says you stole money from your family and he's just helping them get justice." Maria felt sick. "He is poisoning people against me." "Some folks are believing it," Tommy admitted. "Sheriff's asking questions. Blackwood's got influence in town and people listen to him." Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "How many men can we count on?" "All of them," Tommy said without hesitation. "Charlie's already talked to the boys. They're loyal to you, boss, and they like Miss Maria, but 8 of us against 10 experienced gunmen ... "We've faced worse odds," Jake said, but Maria could hear the worry in his voice. "No," Maria said suddenly, standing up. "This has gone far enough. I will not let good men die because of my problems. Maria, we've been through this ... "Listen." "To me," Maria interrupted, her voice firm. "There's another way. I go to Blackwood. I agree to work for him for 1 year. He pays my family's debt. Carlos goes home and everyone is safe." "Absolutely not," Jake said. "You know what Blackwood really wants? And you're carrying my child? I won't let you sacrifice yourself to that snake." "It would not be forever," Maria argued. 1 year. I could survive 1 year if it meant keeping you safe. And what about our baby? What about us?" Jake's voice was raw with emotion. "I just found you, Maria. I just found hope again. I can't lose you now." Maria reached up to touch his face. "You would not lose me. When the year was over, I would come back to you." "If he let you," Jake said bitterly. "Men like Blackwood don't give up what they think belongs to them." Tommy cleared his throat awkwardly. "Boss, there might be another way. What if we could prove Blackwood was lying? What if we could turn the town against him instead of against Miss Maria?" "How?" Jake asked. "Well, I heard some interesting talk in the saloon. Seems Blackwood's been making promises to a lot of folks. Promises he hasn't kept. There's a widow named Mrs. Patterson who lost her farm when Blackwood foreclosed on her loan. And old Pete Jenkins says Blackwood cheated him in a cattle deal." Maria felt a spark of hope. "You think these people would speak against him?" "Maybe," Tommy said, "if they thought it would matter. But it would take time to gather evidence, and we don't have time." "Then we make time," Jake said grimly. "Tommy, ride back to town. Find Mrs. Patterson and anyone else who has grievances against Blackwood. Tell them to meet at the church tomorrow morning. Tell them it's time to stand up to the man who's been bullying this county for too long." "What about Carlos and his men?" Maria asked. "We deal with them too," Jake said. "But first, we try to remove Blackwood's support in town. If the sheriff sees that Blackwood is the real problem here, maybe he'll be less likely to believe his lies." As Tommy rode off again, Maria turned to Jake. "This is very dangerous. If we fail, at least we fail fighting together," Jake said. "I'm done letting other people control our fate, Maria. It's time we took control ourselves." And if Blackwood's men come here before Tommy gets back? Jake checked his rifle grimly. Then we make our stand here. Charlie, Frank. He called out too. Cowboys emerged from the shadows where they had been keeping watch. Get the others, Jake ordered. It's time to prepare for war. As the men hurried to follow orders, Maria felt a mixture of fear and determination. Tomorrow would bring either freedom or disaster. But for the first time since Carlos had appeared, she felt like they had a real chance. Jake, she said softly. Yeah? Whatever happens tomorrow, I love you. I want you to know that. Jake pulled her close. I love you too. And I promise you, we're going to win. We're going to build the life we want, raise our children on this ranch, and no one is going to take that away from us. As they held each other under the starlit sky, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the hilltop. Thomas Blackwood had come to survey his prize, but what he saw made his face twist with rage. If Jake Morrison thought he could turn the town against him, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Blackwood had not become the most powerful man in the county by being gentle with his enemies. Tomorrow would indeed bring war, but Blackwood intended to make sure he was the only one left standing when the smoke cleared. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound of horses and angry voices. Maria woke to find Jake already gone from their bed, the space beside her cold. Through the window she could see men gathering in the yard, Jake's cowboys on one side, Carlos and his hired guns on the other. She dressed quickly and ran to the kitchen, where she found Jake loading his rifle. They came early, he said grimly, before Tommy could get back from town. Maria looked out at the men facing each other in the yard. Carlos sat his horse with confidence, flanked by the Mexican gunmen. But she also saw Thomas Blackwood's hired guns positioned around the property. They were outnumbered badly. Where are our men? She asked. Charlie's in the barn with Frank and Lise. Pedro's up in the loft with a rifle. The others are scattered around the property. Jake's face was tense. It's not enough. Carlos called out from the yard. Morrison, send out the woman and no one gets hurt. Jake stepped onto the porch, Maria close behind him despite his protests. She's not going anywhere, Viga. Then you all die, Carlos replied simply. He raised his hand ready to signal his men, but before anyone could move, the sound of approaching horses filled the air. A large group of riders was coming fast from the direction of town. Maria's heart sank, thinking it was more of Blackwood's men, but as the dust cleared, she saw Tommy leading the group, followed by Sheriff Coleman and at least a dozen townspeople. Among them were Mrs. Patterson, old Pete Jenkins, and several other faces Maria recognized from her trips to town. Thomas Blackwood's expression changed from confident to concerned as he saw the sheriff approaching. What's the meaning of this? Sheriff? Blackwood called out. Sheriff Coleman was a weathered man in his 50s who had been keeping peace in the county for over a decade. He dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in the armed men facing each other. That's what I'd like to know, the sheriff said. Got some interesting stories this morning about debts and foreclosures and missing cattle. Seems like there's been some confusion about who the real criminals are around here. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her voice carrying across the yard. That man, she pointed at Blackwood, stole my farm with a fake loan document. I've got the real papers to prove it. And he's been rustling cattle from small ranchers for months, added Pete Jenkins. Makes it look like Indian raids, then buys up the land cheap when folks get scared. Carlos looked confused by this turn of events. Sheriff, we are here for the woman. She belongs to my employer in Mexico. Well now, Sheriff Coleman said slowly, that's interesting. Because according to these folks, your friend Blackwood here has been telling some tall tales about Miss Santos. Claims she's a thief, but can't seem to produce any evidence. The evidence is my word, Blackwood said smoothly. Surely that's enough. Used to be, the sheriff admitted. But when a man's word gets called into question by this many people, he gestured to the townspeople behind him. Well, a lawman has to wonder what else might not be true. Maria stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. Sheriff Coleman, I did run away from Mexico, but not because I stole anything. I ran because my father owed money to a cruel man who wanted to force me into marriage. I came here seeking honest work and found it with Mr. Morrison. She's my wife, Jake added firmly, legally married under Texas law. Carlos spat on the ground. Gringo marriage means nothing. The girl belongs to Don Rodrigo. Actually, Sheriff Coleman said, Texas law says differently. A woman who marries here becomes a citizen, with all the rights that brings, including the right to choose her own life. Thomas Blackwood's face was growing red with anger. Sheriff, you're interfering with a legal matter. These men have traveled a long way. These men, the sheriff interrupted, are armed strangers on my county's soil, threatening citizens. That makes it my business. He turned to Carlos. I suggest you and your men ride back to Mexico while you still can. Carlos's hand moved toward his gun. We do not leave without the woman. The tension in the yard stretched tight as a wire. Maria could see that Carlos was beyond reason and his men looked ready to fight. But she also saw something else, fear in Thomas Blackwood's eyes, as he realized his carefully laid plans were falling apart. Carlos, Maria called out, stepping into the open despite Jake's attempts to stop her. Wait, I have something to say. All eyes turned to her as she walked toward the Mexican leader. You say I belong to Don Rodrigo because of my father's debt. But what if that debt was paid another way? There is no other way, Carlos growled. What if I told you that Thomas Blackwood owes money to people in this town? Money he stole through false documents and fake loans? Maria's voice grew stronger. What if those people were willing to forgive his debts in exchange for him paying my father's debt to Don Rodrigo? Blackwood's eyes went wide. You can't be serious. Oh, but I am, Maria said, turning to face him. You wanted to buy me, mister. Blackwood, well, here's your chance. Pay my family's debt, and these good people might forget about the money you stole from them. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. That's right. He owes me $2,000. I'll forgive it if he pays this girl's family what they need. Same here, said Pete Jenkins. $3,000 he owes me. One by one, the townspeople called out amounts. Debts and stolen property that added up to far more than Maria's family owed. Blackwood found himself trapped. If he refused, he would face criminal charges. If he agreed, he would lose a fortune. But Maria had given him a way out that would save his reputation, if not his wallet. This is blackmail, he said through gritted teeth. This is justice, Sheriff. Coleman corrected. What's it going to be, Blackwood? Before Blackwood could answer, Carlos made his choice. Seeing his easy payday slipping away, he drew his gun with a curse. Enough talk, we take the woman now. The yard exploded into violence. Carlos's men opened fire, and Jake's cowboys responded in kind. In the chaos, Maria saw Carlos aiming directly at Jake and threw herself between them, the bullet meant for Jake. Caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her to the ground. Jake's roar of rage echoed across the yard as he emptied his rifle into Carlos. Dropping the man from his saddle, the fight was brutal but brief. The Mexican gunmen, caught between Jake's men and the armed townspeople, were quickly overwhelmed. When the smoke cleared, Carlos and two of his men were dead, the others surrendering. Thomas Blackwood, seeing which way the wind was blowing, tried to slip away in the confusion. But Tommy and Charlie were waiting for him. Where are you going, mister? Blackwood? Tommy asked cheerfully, his gun trained on the fleeing man. As the wounded were tended to and the prisoners secured, Jake knelt beside Maria, pressing his shirt against her bleeding shoulder. You crazy woman, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You could have been killed. So could you, Maria gasped, pain making her voice weak. I could not let that happen. The baby, Jake said suddenly, fear in his eyes. Is fine, Maria assured him. The bullet only hit my shoulder. But Jake ... it hurts. I know, sweetheart. We'll get you to the doctor. You're going to be fine. As they helped Maria into a wagon for the trip to town, Sheriff Coleman approached Jake. Blackwood's agreed to pay the debts, all of them. Seems. He's suddenly very interested in avoiding jail time. Jake nodded, his attention focused on Maria. And the Mexican authorities? Well, with Carlos dead and no legal claim to Miss Santos under our law, I'd say that matter's settled. The sheriff tipped his hat. You've got yourself a brave woman there, Morrison. Don't let her go. Never, Jake said firmly, climbing into the wagon beside Maria. Never again. As they rode toward town, Maria leaned against Jake's chest, exhausted but victorious. They had fought for their love and won. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility. Jake, she whispered. What is it, sweetheart? Next time someone tries to take me away from you, maybe we should just shoot them first and ask questions later. Despite everything, Jake found himself laughing. I'll keep that in mind, he said, kissing the top of her head. I'll definitely keep that in mind. 6 months later, Maria stood in front of the mirror in what was now truly her bedroom, adjusting the white lace dress that had belonged to Jake's mother. Her shoulder had healed well, leaving only a small scar that Jake said made her look like a warrior. Today, that warrior was getting married. Outside the window, she could see the guests gathering in the garden she had planted behind the house. The vegetables had grown beautifully, and now flower beds bordered the ceremony area. Cowboys from neighboring ranches mixed with townspeople, including Mrs. Patterson and Pete Jenkins, who had become good friends after their shared victory over Thomas Blackwood. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Charlie peeked his head in, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. Miss Maria, the preacher's ready when you are? How does Jake look? Maria asked, smoothing her dress over her growing belly. Charlie grinned. Like a man who can't believe his luck. Which, if you ask me, is exactly how he should look. Maria laughed. Over the months since the shooting, the Cowboys had become like brothers to her. They had helped her expand the garden, taught her to ride properly, and even learned some of her Mexican recipes. In return, she had mended their clothes, tended their injuries, and made the ranch feel like a real home. Charlie, she said as he prepared to leave, thank you for everything. For standing with us when things got dangerous. The old cowboy's weathered face softened. Miss Maria, you saved this place. Before you came, it was just a ranch. Now it's a home. We should be thanking you. As Charlie left, Maria took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the desperate, frightened girl who had arrived 6 months ago. This woman stood tall, with confidence in her eyes and love in her heart. This woman was ready to face whatever the future might bring. She walked outside to find Jake waiting at the altar they had built together from ranch wood and decorated with wildflowers. He wore his best suit and his hair was neatly combed, but Maria could see the emotion in his eyes as she approached. Tommy walked beside her, proudly giving her away since her own family was thousands of miles away. The young cowboy had grown into a confident man over the past months, and Maria knew he would make a fine foreman someday. As she reached Jake's side, he took her hands in his. You look beautiful, he whispered. You clean up pretty well yourself. Cowboy, she whispered back, making him smile. The preacher, a kind man from town who had known Jake for years, began the ceremony. But Maria barely heard the words. She was thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment, the desperate flight from Mexico, the frightening confrontation with Carlos, the long weeks of healing and growing to love each other truly. And deeply, when it came time for the vows, Jake's voice was strong and clear. Maria, you came into my life when I thought happiness was behind me forever. You brought light into darkness, hope into despair, and love into a heart I thought was broken beyond repair. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and stand by your side through whatever comes. You and our children will always have a home with me. Maria felt tears on her cheeks as she spoke her own vows. Jake, you gave me safety when I was afraid, purpose when I felt lost, and love when I thought I would have to face life alone. You chose me when I had nothing to offer but my heart. I promise to be your partner in all things, to build this life with you, and to love you with everything I have. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake's kiss was gentle but full of promise. The crowd cheered, and Maria heard Pedro calling out blessings in Spanish while Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the county had seen. Maria had spent weeks preparing food that combined her Mexican heritage with local Texas favorites. There were tamales and enchiladas alongside barbecued beef and cornbread. The Cowboys had learned some Mexican folk dances, while Maria had taught the local women how to make her grandmother's wedding cookies. As the sun set over the prairie, Jake and Maria found themselves alone for a moment on the porch of their house. The guests were still celebrating in the garden, but the newlyweds had stepped away for a quiet moment together. "No regrets?" Jake asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About what?" Maria asked, leaning into his warmth. "Leaving your old life behind. Coming here. Marrying a rough cowboy instead of staying safe in Mexico." Maria thought about his question seriously. "Jake, my old life was not safe. It was a cage made of other people's expectations. Here with you, I am free to be who I really am." "And who are you really?" Jake asked, though he thought he knew. The answer: "I am a woman who is not afraid of hard work. I am a wife who will stand by her husband through good times and bad. I am a mother who will raise strong children to know both their Mexican heritage and their American home." Maria paused, looking out at the land that was now theirs. "And I am someone who knows that love is not about desperation or need. Real love is about choice. Every day I choose you." Jake felt his heart fill with emotion. "I choose you too. Every day for the rest of my life." A few months later, as winter settled over the ranch, Maria gave birth to their first son. They named him Diego James Morrison, honoring both his Mexican heritage and his American future. Jake held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, thinking of the child he had lost and the miracle he had been given. "He looks like you," Maria said weakly from the bed, exhausted but happy. "He has your eyes," Jake replied. "And your fighting spirit, I'm sure." As the years passed, the Morrison Ranch became known throughout Texas for its fair treatment of workers, its excellent horses, and Maria's legendary cooking. They had 3 more children, another son they named Carlos, after the man who had tried to take Maria away, because Maria said even enemies could teach you important lessons, and twin daughters who inherited their mother's beauty and their father's determination. Maria never forgot where she came from, and she made sure her children knew their heritage. She taught them Spanish and English, Mexican traditions, and American customs. They grew up understanding that strength came not from where you were born, but from how you chose to live your life. The ranch hands remained loyal through the years, many of them staying to start families of their own nearby. Tommy became foreman. When Charlie retired, and Pedro brought his own family from Mexico to help run the expanded operation on quiet evenings. When the children were asleep and the work was done, Jake and Maria would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Sometimes they talked about their dreams for the future. Sometimes they simply held each other in comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had chosen differently that first day?" Maria asked one evening, their youngest daughter sleeping in her arms. "If I had turned you away, you mean?" Jake considered the question. "I try not to. Think about it. I can't imagine my life without you." "I can," Maria said softly. "I would have found another way to survive. Women like me always do. But I would never have found happiness like this. I would never have found home." As they sat together under the Texas stars, surrounded by the life they had built with their own hands and hearts, Maria thought about the desperate woman who had whispered, "Please choose me," to a stranger 6 years ago. That woman had been seeking safety and shelter. What she had found was so much more. She had found love, purpose, family, and a place in the world where she belonged completely. "Jake," she said quietly. "Ma?" He replied, half asleep in his chair, "I'm glad you chose me." "I'm glad you chose me back," Jake said, reaching over to take her hand. "Best decision I ever made?" As the moon rose over their land, Maria smiled to herself. Sometimes the most desperate moments led to the most beautiful outcomes. Sometimes asking someone to choose you was really just the first step in choosing yourself, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who would spend the rest of their life choosing you. Again and again, every single day, the wind, carried the sound of cattle settling for the night, the gentle nicker of horses in the corral, and the satisfied sigh of a woman who had found her place in the world. This was home. This was love. This was the life they had built together, one choice at a time.